All right, let's talk about what is, without a doubt, one of the most demanding jobs on the entire planet. President of the United States. We're not just talking about a corner office here, this is all about the Oval Office.
So let's start with the basics. What's the fundamental job description? Well, the whole executive branch, which the president leads, has one main purpose: to take the laws that Congress writes and actually put them into action. You can think of it as the government's giant engine room, and the president, well, they're the one at the controls.
Okay, so that's the job in a nutshell. But the real question is, who can even apply for this thing? And how in the world do they actually get hired?
Let's actually think about this whole thing like a hiring process. First, you've got the application, the basic requirements. Then you have to get through the interview process, which is intense. And if you make it through all that, you finally get the contract. And this is where it gets really interesting, because there's a huge gap between the official rules and, well, the real world. The formal requirements in the Constitution, they're pretty simple. But let's be honest, it's the unwritten rules, things like having political experience, charisma, and especially the ability to raise massive amounts of money, that really decide who even gets a shot at the job.
So let's say you check all the boxes. How do you actually get hired? Well, it's not a simple nationwide popular vote. The U.S. has a unique system called the Electoral College, which was tweaked by the 12th Amendment. This means the election is really 50 separate contests, and the winner is the person who gets a majority of electoral votes, not necessarily the most individual votes across the country. And yeah, that's how a candidate can sometimes win the presidency without winning the popular vote.
So what about the contract itself? How long is the gig? Originally, there were no limits, but after Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected 4 times, the country passed the 22nd Amendment, which basically said, okay, 2 terms is the max. So now, the contract length is officially set at a maximum of 2 4-year terms.
And of course, for a job this important, you absolutely need an emergency plan. The 25th Amendment gives us a crystal clear line of succession. If the president can't do their job, there's a whole flowchart of who's up next. It starts with the vice president, then moves to the Speaker of the House, and then to the President pro tempore of the Senate.
All right, so you got the job. Congratulations! Now the real work starts. And you quickly realize a president doesn't just have one job. It's more like they have to wear a whole bunch of different hats, sometimes all at the same time.
First up is the big one, Commander-in-Chief. This is a core principle of American democracy, that the person in charge of the entire military is a civilian, not a general. It's all about ensuring democratic control over the armed forces. Next, the president is the chief executive. You can think of this as the CEO hat. They're the boss of this enormous organization we call the federal government, with millions of employees working in everything from NASA to the National Park Service.
Now, the president can't just write laws on their own, but as the chief agenda setter, they have what we call the bully pulpit. Through big moments like the State of the Union address or their budget proposal, they essentially tell Congress and the country, hey, this is what I think we need to work on.
Then you've got the role of chief of state. This is the more symbolic, ceremonial part of the job. Things like welcoming foreign leaders, awarding the Medal of Honor, or acting as the nation's representative during times of tragedy or triumph.
As chief diplomat, the president is literally the face of America to the rest of the planet. They're our lead negotiator, the one who builds alliances, hammers out treaties, and basically steers the ship of our foreign policy.
And finally, there's a role that's not actually in the Constitution, but it is a huge part of the modern presidency: party leader. The president is, by default, the most powerful person in their political party, and they're expected to push the party's agenda and help other members win elections.
Okay, so nobody, and I mean nobody, could possibly juggle all those jobs alone. So let's take a look at the huge team and the powerful set of tools our president gets to help them do the job.
It's pretty wild to think about, but when George Washington first started, his senior management team, what we now call the cabinet, was just 4 people. That's it. 4 people to help him figure out everything from foreign policy to the nation's money.
Fast forward to today, and that tiny team has, well, it's exploded. The president now sits on top of this massive, complex organization called the federal bureaucracy. We're talking millions of employees, all working to implement and enforce the laws of the country.
So how do you even organize a team that big? Generally, you can break it down into 3 main categories. You've got the big executive agencies, like the Department of Defense. You've got independent agencies that regulate specific parts of the economy. And you even have government corporations, like the U.S. Postal Service.
But it's not just about the people on the team. The president also has a very specific set of tools they can use to get things done.
especially when it comes to dealing with other countries.
And this toolkit gives the president a whole spectrum of options. On one end, you have peaceful tools like diplomacy and treaties. In the middle, you have things like economic or humanitarian aid. And on the other end, you have more forceful tools like economic sanctions, or as a last resort, direct military intervention.
You know, President Lyndon B. Johnson, who suddenly found himself in the Oval Office after JFK's assassination, I think he summed it up perfectly. His point was that the job itself, the sheer weight and responsibility of it, is so immense that it can't help but change the person who holds it.
So, when you boil it all down, the presidency is a job of almost unimaginable scope. It's part CEO, part national symbol, part top diplomat, and part supreme commander, all rolled into one person. And that leaves us with one final and really important thought. When you concentrate that much power into a single person, how do you make sure that power is always balanced with accountability? That's the central question, isn't it?